Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Everyman's Odyssey podcast, where we explore the values and the challenges of authentic masculinity through sharing stories and ideas. I'm the host and founder of the podcast, Cole McClure. Recently in episode 4, we had talked about how to be a better husband and the concepts behind that. So we dove a lot into ideas and the values behind that and the driving mission that makes us want to be a better husband. But today what I would like to go over is more of the practical application and some real world examples and things that you can be doing in your own life that'll make that happen. So get comfortable. We got a lot to go over, and I'm going to provide as many examples as I can. I am certainly not someone who has perfected any of these areas, but I certainly strive to better myself in every way for that pursuit. So just to keep this easy to track, we're going to break this down into 4 main areas of focus, and then we'll talk about a bonus category at the end. So we're going to discuss communication, service, support, and romance. So to start with communication, which certainly proved to be a pretty core pillar in my own marriage, and something that we needed help with early on. We started dating in 2004. Juniors in high school is my first relationship, and I had absolutely no idea how to communicate effectively. And now, 19 years later, I would like to think that I am a little bit better at it. But there's some important categories that I want to go over, and we'll break those down within communication, and then we'll discuss some examples of what you can be doing. So communication comes down to active listening without preemptively forming your responses, which is something I'm guilty of pretty frequently. Having patience while your partner is speaking, being honest and in your own issues and feelings and discussing that with her, and having empathy for what she's communicating with you and the way that you use your tone when you speak, and controlling the amount of emotion you're putting into your own words. And the last thing about communication is just asking questions when you don't understand what's wrong, when you don't understand what you did wrong, when you don't understand what she's trying to tell you. Don't make assumptions and don't shut down. Ask clarifying questions, always. Now, some of these things like honesty are pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail there. But something about active listening, that's something that I needed repeated to me quite a few times before I really understood what that meant. And I'm sure it's a term you've heard before, but active listening, like I said, is being able to listen to your partner and what she is saying without, dedicating a lot of your train of thought to what you're going to respond with and what you're going to say afterwards. Just be listening for the meaning when she's speaking to you. And it slows down your own train of thought. It slows down in your emotional response if you're having an argument. And it helps you clarify in your own mind what it is she's trying to tell you before you have to retort back with something condescending or something ignorant because you weren't really listening, so you don't really understand. So be deliberate in the way that you listen to her when your wife is speaking. Another thing would be your tone. And it may be, a joke at times, but it is true. It comes up a lot. It's not what you said, it's how you say it. And even though I try to be conscious of this, in my own marriage, it's certainly something that I struggle with still. Even if I'm saying the right thing, I tend to put some sarcasm or some humor that is just very poorly timed behind the things that I say. So control your tone, think about how you're speaking, and especially if it's in a heated argument, you really need to regulate your emotions and kind of filter that through what it is you're trying to communicate. So for communication, I think that kind of sets the tone there. Like I said, don't forget about patience, honesty, empathy, and don't forget to ask those clarifying questions when you're communicating with your wife. Now, the next category is service. And while I may not be an expert at any of these categories, this one is definitely my favorite. I love performing acts of service for my wife. And this will break down into 4 smaller subcategories. And the first one being is learning her love language, which sounds kind of odd, but it goes back to what I said about communication. You need to ask questions. If you don't already know the thing that speaks to your wife the most and what makes her feel the most loved, then you need to ask. So when it comes to love language, that could be, time spent. That can be acts of service, like we're talking about here. It could be gifts or words of affirmation. Whatever that is, you need to learn that about your wife if you don't already know. That way you can start applying this. The next thing is don't wait to be told. And again, I'm going to use a lot of examples that are things that I struggle with. I am always ready and willing to do just about anything that needs to be done. My problem is that I have a tendency to wait until I'm told that it needs to be done. So I think part of this service attitude is being more aware and observant of your environment at home and seeing where the need is and anticipate that and do what you know needs to be done, or do what you know would speak to her or be appreciated without having to be told to do it. The next thing here kind of coincides with that. Whenever possible, anticipate and meet her needs before addressing your own needs. Now, there's a million different ways you can apply this in your own marriage, so I don't want to get into too much detail about what that looks like for you, because it can be different for everybody. But this goes from, small things like when you're sitting down for dinner, get her a drink before you get your own, all the way up to, budgetary needs. And when you're making decisions for the family, consider her wants and needs above your own. And again, that's a concept that we had talked about in episode 4. But look for ways to apply that directly in your own marriage. And the last part of service is to make sure that you are doing more than your fair share. Do not settle for sharing the load 50-50. You are the man of the house. You are her husband, her provider, her protector. Don't settle for your fair share. You take on everything that you can. And when you hit a point in your life where you can't handle as much, then it goes back to communication and let her know what you're dealing with, and she'll be happy to share that load with you. But whenever possible, you take on more than just an equal share. That is your responsibility. And some examples of that can be little things, when it comes to doing chores around the house with dishes or laundry or dealing with the kids, whatever, or finances and bills, whatever it is that you feel like, you're going to split down the middle. I'm going to handle this, you handle this. That is a good system to have. But don't be consumed with the idea that you need to make sure that things are fair. If you want to be the best husband that you can, you don't want it to be fair. You want it to be balanced in her favor, because that is a way that you can express your love for her, is taking on more so that she takes on less. Because at least in my life, I know no matter how much I try to take on, my wife is always thinking of more and considering more and caring for more people than I am, even at my best. So don't be afraid to step outside of that fairness zone to do what's best and what's right, not always what's fair. The next category is support. And again, that'll break down into 4 subcategories. The first one is just about your presence. Be there, and don't just physically be there for her. Be available mentally, emotionally, your time. Make it known that you are available to her when she needs you. So if she's going through something, be there for her and take time out of your day to make sure that she knows that. And if something great happens, be there to celebrate with her. Just be a partner in everything that she is doing as an individual to show that you support her as who she is in her own life, not just in your family or in your marriage, but see her for her. And the next thing is to sacrifice. And again, these are things that we've touched on briefly before, but making sacrifices where you can to make things happen for her. Whether that be like making sure that you take care of the kids for this entire day so she can get out of the house and do something with her friends or her family. Or maybe there's something that you've been saving up for and you can save up a little bit longer and sacrifice some of that to make sure that she can treat herself with something. And I'm sure you can find ways in your own marriage, and there's probably already something coming to mind where you know you could sacrifice something of yourself or resources that you have to do something for her, especially when it comes to things that she's not doing for herself. The next one would be to share her responsibilities. And like we said, there's often times where you'll come up with a system to share the load. You know, you cook, I'll clean up. You take care of the laundry, I'll clean the bathrooms, whatever it's going to be. It's a good system to have, and I think it helps the house run smoother. But don't get bogged down in those details. If you see an opportunity to bless your wife by doing one of those things that's on her list, just do it. If you've got the time and the energy, and even if you don't have the energy, I bet you can make the time. I think that speaks volumes to show your love, and to let her know the type of husband that you are for her. And the last one for this support category is to make sure that she feels seen and appreciated. Now, a lot of times, depending on where you are in life, it gets easy to get into a routine. You become, this one organism driving towards a goal, or you're buckled down saving up for this one thing, or you guys are split apart doing all these different tasks, and that becomes normal. And that happens, and that's okay. But you need to be cognizant and aware of that so that you can break out of that and recognize that you aren't just one organism always. You are man and wife, and that means that you need to be able to see her for her and remind her that she is her own person with her own values and dreams, aspirations, issues, and that you recognize and validate all of those things that she is on her own. And doing that is a great way to lead into the final category here, which is romance. Now, this one we're actually going to break up into 6 different subcategories. And full disclosure, the reason for that is the more thought I put into it, the more areas I was able to identify where I need to be improving. And lucky for you, that makes for more content that we can discuss here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is be sincere. And now that really applies to everything that you're doing. But when it comes to encouraging more romantic love, sincerity is a big part of that. And what I mean by that is don't make everything a joke. Not everything needs to be followed up with, "That's what she said," or some sort of sarcastic remark. It's okay to just see the dad joke opportunity and leave it there once in a while. You don't have to make that comments. And maybe this is more for myself, but I certainly tend to try to make every scenario a joke when that's not really necessary. And sometimes it's funny, and other times it's just taking away from what could have been a nice, sincere moment. So think about that and evaluate how you approach your conversations with your wife and see if you have that same struggle that I do. The next thing is to be intentional. A lot of times when you get busy or you get into a routine, a lot of things that you might do for your wife or don't do is based on its convenience. You know, if it's on the way to do something that you were already doing, or if it's convenient for you, then, you know, we can make this work. But aside from convenience, be deliberate about the things that you're doing and make it known that it was a deliberate choice. And don't brag about going out of your way to do something for her, but also don't downplay everything like, oh, well, you know, it was on my way. Like, make sure that she knows that you put thought and effort into the things that you do for her. And that thought and care is going to trump convenience every time when it comes to encouraging a more romantic relationship. The next thing, which is a big one to learn for me, was to let go of expectations, especially, you know, with our relationship beginning so young. You just kind of go off of what you're told it's supposed to look like. And so you set these rules in your head, whether that be, you know, from mentors or past relationships or failed relationships, whatever it may be that influences your train of thought. Some of that is useful, and I'm not saying, you know, abandon all advice. But what I am saying is don't put your relationship in a box. You want your love to be unique. And another thing that addresses the expectations is your expectations for her and how that influences your behavior. When you're doing something for your wife, you do it because it is for her and out of your love for her. Don't approach it with this quid pro quo attitude where I'm going to do this for her, and in return, I expect to get something back that I'm looking for. And you can interpret that however you like and how that applies to your relationship. When it's done right, your relationship and your romantic relationship with your wife will not mirror anybody else's or anything else's. It will be as unique as the two of you, and that is exactly what you want. Now, another smaller one that we've touched on before is to be spontaneous. Once you have learned your wife's love language, act that out spontaneously, not in a routine, not always scheduled at this time on this day. Make sure that you leave some wiggle room in your schedule where you can, so that you have the ability and the power to be spontaneous, whether that be showing up with gifts or random, you know, acts of kindness, and, you know, random communication like sticky notes left on the mirror or text messages or, you know, calls during your day just to check in and see how she's doing. Make sure that you have that space in your day and in your head to be able to do that. Another category here is being serious about dating your wife and making time for that. You need to be the one to set this up. You need to make time and put in effort and think about how you're going to make this happen, and then make it happen. Sometimes life is crazy and it can be hard to plan these things, so use your judgment. Maybe it's time to even take a vacation day from work to dedicate that time to your wife. Evaluate the time and your relationship and make a plan accordingly to address that. But you need to constantly be dating your wife, and that does mean setting up dedicated time to do something, you know, out of the house or even out of town when you can, and just make those memories. And the last thing is to ask questions. Just like when it comes to communication, you want to learn what she's saying. When it comes to romantic needs and expression, you want to know who she is and what she likes and what she loves, and how your relationship is developing in that way. So asking those questions, and not always explicitly and coming out and asking the question verbally, but being observant and being a student of who your wife is and who she is becoming. Oh, your wife is an ever-changing and frequently surprising gift from God. Whether you've been with her for 5 months or 5 decades, you will never finish getting to know her. And there is a beautiful mystery in the depths of her heart, and you will never be done learning more about her. But there is joy and honor and fulfillment in the pursuit. So never give that up. And lastly, our bonus category is self-improvement. And maybe that seems more selfish and less related to actually these daily applications in how to be a better husband, but it is an important part of it. I mean, it's kind of right there in the name. You can't be a better husband without being a better version of yourself. And a good way to ensure that you're bettering in one way is to make sure you're bettering yourself in other ways. So one thing that you need to do is read a book or read something, listen to an audiobook, listen to a podcast. I think is a great place to start. But I've been reading Wild at Heart. I just finished going through John Lovell's book, Warrior Poet Way, and there's a multitude of other books, and we can discuss that another time. But finding some content that inspires you and convicts you to change and do some self-reflection. You need to identify some area of weakness in your life. And not to say that you shouldn't value your strengths or get down on yourself, but you do need to be someone who can take a look at themselves honestly and find out where you're not meeting your own expectations. And if you find that you are meeting and exceeding all of your expectations for yourself, then that means it's time to raise the bar, push harder, and improve on something. Another great way to do this is to identify a habit, whether that's a bad one that you've been meaning to kick or a good one that you've been meaning to start. Both of those take discipline and dedication to accomplish, and doing that will make you better. And an important part of this is accountability. Find a friend who you can count on to check in on you and to encourage you in these efforts. And if you guys are listening to this together, this is a great way to start, and you can decide that and make a deal with each other. Like, hey, I really need to work on this. I need to finish this book that I started reading, or I need to get back into the gym. Whatever it is, find someone who knows about it and is going to hold you to that. That way you stick with it. So guys, that's really all I have for the practical application of what we had talked about earlier about being a better husband. So just to reiterate, you need to focus on your communication, the way that you act out serving your wife, the way that you support her, and the way that you romance her. And again, all of these things will lead to that bonus category of self-improvement as well. Now, real quick, I do want to mention that I wasn't even actually planning on making this episode. I finished the How to Be a Better Husband episode, and I already had the next interview recorded and ready to go. But then I noticed that someone had put a comment in the poll section in the episode details saying that they loved the episode, but wished that I had provided some practical examples of how to apply those lessons. So I took the feedback and made a whole nother episode just to go into that. So if you guys do have feedback, I read the comments there. You can always mention something in the questions at the end of the episode details, or you can send me a message on Patreon, and I do respond accordingly. So just to let you know, that's always an option. So, as always, thanks for tuning in. And if you're enjoying the content, please feel free to share and review it. And if there's something you'd like to see covered on the podcast and you have recommendations or questions, feel free to reach out on social media or send a message on Patreon. Or like I said, look for the polls at the end of the episode details on Spotify. Thanks again, guys. Take care.